Hello and welcome. I'm Megha Sharma. You're watching NewsX World and this is the World Report. Let's take a look at the top headlines of the hour. China hits back at US with 84% retaliatory tariffs. This comes after US tariffs of 104% on China kicked off today. China says it will continue to take resolute and forceful countermeasures. European and Asian stocks have plummeted as Trump's new levies come into force. The White House says up to 70 countries have opened conversations to secure trade deals. China says America has used blackmail over the Panama Canal as American Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says US will take back the canal from Chinese influence. Beijing calls Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's claims as baseless after European leaders said more Chinese troops were fighting for Russia. It comes as two reported Chinese nationals were captured, allegedly fighting against Kyiv's forces. The death toll from a nightclub roof collapse in Dominican Republic has now risen to 113 as per the emergency services report. Rescue efforts are continuing in Santo Domingo following the disaster during the concert. Germany's top parties are set to announce a coalition deal to form a new government after weeks of negotiations. The conservative CDU-CSU alliance and the SPD will form government following February's election. Israel says it targeted Hamas in a strike on a Gaza residential block that has reportedly killed 20 people. Military action is continuing amidst calls from the United Nations to lift aid blockages in the enclave. Iran says it is ready to engage with the US on talks over a new nuclear deal only if America stops military threats. Iran's foreign minister says talks with a view to seal a deal could take place on Saturday. The future on Wall Street briefly rebounded from their lows, but extreme volatility has returned once again. European markets are declining again as Trump's tariffs take effect, reversing yesterday's short-lived recovery that ended a 4-day losing streak. Earlier, Asia-Pacific stocks initiated a global equity rebound, with US markets initially following suit before pulling back. Big Tech's Magnificent Seven sheds $2 trillion as Trump intensified tariff measures. Oil prices have plunged to a 4-year low as international relations experts warn that the escalating trade war is threatening global energy demand. Chipmaking giants hit by tariffs facing threefold trade war impact. Joining me right now is Ayanaba Banerjee. Ayanaba, shed more light into how the markets are reacting in Europe particularly.
Thank you, Megha. Now let's take a look at the markets of Europe. IBEX 35, which is the benchmark stock market index of Spain, is currently at 11,686.40 points, which is lesser than 379.20 points of yesterday. It has also gone down 3.16% since yesterday. Moving on to FTSE 100 index, which is the United Kingdom's best known stock market index. It currently stands at 7,716 points and has gone down 3.58% since yesterday. Moving on to DAX performance index, which is the stock market index of Germany. It currently stands at 19,781.5 points and has gone down 3.98% since yesterday, which basically means it has also gone down 807.39 points since yesterday. Moving on to CAC 40, which is a benchmark French stock market index. It currently stands at 6,925.98 points and has gone down 3.90% since yesterday. That is all we have from Europe. Over to you, Megha, in the studio.
All right, let's take a look at some other developments. In fact, Ajit Dua, who's the former Commerce Secretary, joining me on the telecast. Ajit Dua, big developments, particularly right now. Just a few moments ago, China comes up with retaliatory tariffs. It says additionally there are going to be 84% tariffs that are going to be imposed on America, and these are going to come to effect tomorrow onwards, April 10th. How is this going to shake the markets?
Thank you very much, Megha. I think what the United States did yesterday, when it imposed another 50% duty or 52%, that it doubled it up from the earlier 52% total which had been imposed on China. China has today just made up the differential. Earlier it had levied a 20% duty. By putting another additional 84%, it has said we will do tit for tat. You're levying 104% upon us, so will we. You have said that these will come into effect at 12 o'clock on the 9th. That's tonight. So, because China being a little ahead, they said, so will we. Ours come effective about the same time on the 10th, since they are in the Eastern Hemisphere. So we are seeing an outright trade war which has begun. I don't think we should mince our words that there are fears of trade war, or now we're going to be seeing outright disruption of global trade with the two largest economies, two largest trading blocks at each other's throat. How it will shape the world economy, it cannot be, no one can, even the most optimistic person cannot say that it will be good for the world. I think we are heading into all kinds of consequential effects upon countries in the West as well as in the East, developed as well as not so developed, and it will also affect, and that could have manifold more serious attempts at capital flows between the countries, which we have been seeing. So trade leading to capital flows effect, investments, stock market is just one manifestation, which means an all-round disruption in economic growth and development.
Right, absolutely. Also statements coming in, there are up to 70 countries that have already called up Donald Trump, the US administration, wanting to hold meetings with the US administration to strike some sort of a trade deal so that the tariffs can be reduced. These include not just countries in Asia, including Vietnam and, talking about Malaysia, talking about Thailand, but it is also countries from Europe like Spain and Italy and South America as well.
Which is so true. But the question is, President Trump has dismissed all these by using some four-letter word yesterday, saying that they are all running around him and they want to do this, and they want to do this, that means suck up to him, etc., which is not done, even if because you are dealing with independent sovereign nations. They are affected. Yes, you are the world's biggest economy, the world's biggest trader, most powerful country, but when 70 countries or 50 countries, whatever the number is, appeal to you saying, please give us more time, we are willing to negotiate. All that you do is see your closest ally, that's the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, but even him, he was cut short in the press conference when a question was asked of President Trump in Netanyahu's presence. He says, no, you'd been kind of short of using, again, the slang language which he does.
Okay.
The president was constrained to say, no, I'm not going to reduce it. So this is what he's going to say. He's now telling the 50 or the 70 nations who have appealed to him to go easy, saying, no, I told you I can bring you down to your knees, and I'm doing that. We will see what to do. So China on one side and China, yes, affected more, but he's also taking on 70 other countries of the world. So how can things remain normal, even if there are good intentions to build, make America great, bring manufacturing back? All that a national leader can be expected to do, but certainly not at the cost of disrupting the whole world economy, which is going to affect the very process of recovery which President Trump aims for the United States.
Okay. All right. Thank you for joining me on the telecast and sharing your views. Meanwhile, China has retaliated against United States, imposing a sweeping 84% tariff on American goods as the trade war between the two economic superpowers continues to escalate. This move comes as President Donald Trump pushes ahead with 104% tariffs on Chinese imports. Trump has insisted that China needs to make a deal with the U.S. in response to the new tariffs, and China has vowed to take firm and forceful measures to protect its interests. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian has said that the U.S. actions were a form of bullying and stated that China would fight back till the end. Listen in to what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said.
中国人民的正当发展权利不容剥夺，中国的主权、安全、发展利益不容侵犯。我们将继续采取坚决有力的措施，维护自身的。
Donald Trump has also sharpened his criticism of China's currency policy, slamming back Beijing for manipulating the yuan to gain trade advantages. Additionally, the U.S. president gave Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company TSMC an ultimatum: either build semiconductor plants in America or face 100% tax on its products. Russia has also expressed concern over the U.S.-China trade war. Moscow accused the Americans of violating international trade laws with 104% tariffs imposed on Chinese goods. Listen in to what the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said.
В связи с так называемой тарифной войной между США и Китаем хотели бы отметить, что любые потрясения для мировой экономики, грозящие замедлением темпов ее роста и общим спадом потребления, имеют свою негативную проекцию на многие мировые процессы. Тем более серьезную озабоченность вызывает ситуация, когда речь идет о двух главных экономиках.
The trade conflict continues to stoke recession fears and a global market downturn, with both sides showing little willingness to back down. Ross Feingold, who is a political risk analyst on the telecast with me. Ross, thank you for joining me. And first off, how do you view the 50 countries across Asia, Europe and South America rallying behind Donald Trump, wanting to renegotiate that trade deal to allow for tariffs to come down?
It's clear that a number of countries want to negotiate. The interesting thing, though, is with so many countries claiming they want to negotiate, they're all going to have to get in line, because President Trump or the U.S. government has limited capacity to speak to different countries at the same time. They can only talk to one at the same time, actually. So with that time constraint and resource restraint in mind, it really behooves these countries to be prepared for these conditions and the higher tariffs to last possibly for quite a while before they actually have a chance to negotiate and for President Trump to agree to a deal. So this is going to affect a lot of countries worldwide, but especially those manufacturers here in Asia, including manufacturers in China.
Talking about the additional tariffs that have now been announced by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, 84% of them are going to be brought into effect tomorrow onwards, 10th of April. How adversely impacted is America going to be because of it?
There's certainly going to be exporters in the United States who are affected by this. The agriculture sector is one that comes immediately to mind, but also we have to keep in mind that China is known for exporting manufactured goods to the United States, often low value consumer products, textiles and things like that. Whereas U.S. exporters to China are often exporting higher value added products, more expensive products that they sell to the Chinese middle class or to the Chinese wealthy class. The American exporters are not exporting products for lower middle class or blue-collar types of consumers in China. So the American exporters who do have business in China, they're certainly going to be hurt by China's retaliatory tariffs, and that's why we call this a trade war.
Talking about the alternative supply chains and trade deals that China at this point of time is wanting to negotiate, whether it is South Korea or Japan, or for that matter, feelers being sent out to India. How successful is China going to be in building alternative markets for its goods?
That's also a very interesting issue among all the issues that the United States' new tariffs have caused for international trade. Obviously, relations between India and China have not been smooth, mostly because of the border dispute and India joining the Quad, which China looks at as being a grouping that is meant to constrain China. On the other hand, India still has a big appetite for made in China products, especially those products that simply are not manufactured in India. And Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping have sent signals in recent months that they want to move relations forward. So it's possible that there'll be some kind of greater connection in trade between India and China, but the geopolitics of that are never far behind, and the tensions are never far behind either.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Ross, for joining me, sharing your views on the subject. Moving on, Beijing has strongly criticized while responding to Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary's comments, accusing America of undermining China-Panama cooperation and resorting to bullying tactics. Listen into what China had to say.
美国的高级官员恶意攻击中国，抹黑破坏中巴合作，再次暴露了美国霸道霸凌的面目。中方对此表示坚决反对。谁想要控制巴拿马运河，世人皆知。美国应该自己照照镜子，看看究竟是谁在威胁他国的主权、安全与发展。
The U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has made a significant visit to Panama, marking the second highest level U.S. visit to the country since President Donald Trump took office. During his visit, Hegseth warned of ongoing threats to Panama, asserting that U.S. will not allow China or any other nation to compromise the waterway's integrity. Listen in to his comments.
Our relationship is growing in part to meet Communist China's rising challenge. China-based companies continue to control critical infrastructure in the canal area. That gives China the potential to conduct surveillance activities across Panama. This makes Panama and the United States less secure, less prosperous, and less sovereign. I want to be very clear. China did not build this canal. China does not operate this canal. And China will not weaponize this canal. We will do this in partnership with Panama. Together, we will take back the Panama Canal from China's influence.
The U.S. built the canal over a century ago but handed it over to Panama back in 1996. This diplomatic tension has heightened amidst concerns over China's influence in the region. There was discrepancy in the official statements released by both the American and Panama officials regarding sovereignty of the canal, with the U.S. version omitting a reference to Panama's inalienable sovereignty. Ross Feingold back on the telecast with me. Ross, how difficult is it going to be for America to rid Panama Canal of Chinese influence today?
Excuse me, the situation at the moment is a Hong Kong company controls a port on the Atlantic side and also controls a port on the Pacific side. Now, there was a recent auditor's report in Panama that questioned the legitimacy of the contract extension given to this Hong Kong company in 2021. So it's possible that under Panama legal procedures, the concessions might be removed, which would create a lot of interesting legal issues because the Hong Kong company would probably object and take legal action. At the same time, the Hong Kong company recently tried to sell the ports, together with other ports it owns around the world, to a U.S. asset manager, but the Chinese government has stepped in to block that sale for the moment. So a lot of these issues are really up in the air. But one thing that is definitely not up in the air is the Trump administration's view on this. As long as this Hong Kong company continues to control a port on the Pacific side and the Atlantic side of the Panama Canal, the United States is going to continue to make comments like we saw from Defense Secretary Hegseth or earlier from Secretary of State Rubio. The United States is going to continue to say to the Panamanians that China has too much influence over the canal. So until operation of those two ports reaches some kind of conclusion, the United States is going to take a very, very vocal view on this. And obviously China will object, and we'll have to see how the Panamanians react.
But having a look at what the Chinese policy has been with regards to salami slicing, we take a look at a number of countries, whether it is the Indian subcontinent, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan. We take a look at a number of Southeast Asian countries. We take a look at its aggressive policies against Taiwan and Japan. And then you have South America, and then you have Africa, where there have been ports and air bases that have been set up by China by design. And Panama Canal is no different. How again, the question about the influence of the Chinese is growing across the globe. How has it remained unchecked up until now, right under the noses of the American administration?
That's an excellent question. Very often United States or American companies simply didn't want to do business in many of these locations. They didn't want to get involved with large infrastructure projects, which are incredibly complex. They're subject to wrongdoing such as corruption and bribery, which American companies generally cannot do overseas, although Trump has opened up the ability to do that with a recent executive order. But generally speaking, American companies have avoided some of these projects, and Chinese companies that do large infrastructure projects are basically state-owned and working at the direction of the Chinese government, which made a strategic decision to do these kinds of infrastructure projects, whether that's ports, railways, industrial parks, bridges, highways, and they're willing to do it in places around the world, like in Africa, like in South Asia, like in Sri Lanka, as you mentioned, in Southeast Asia, and in Central and South America. And they were able to develop what they called the Belt and Road with a lot of infrastructure. Some of it involves heavy debt that these countries owe to China, and it's a policy that has worked for China for almost 10 years, but now there's greater appreciation of the risks. So we see lots of criticism from the United States and to a lesser extent from the European Union as well. But if they really want to combat this and get their own companies to invest in these projects, then there has to be a mindset change with the private sector from Europe and the United States, and they have to show more willingness to do these projects in the developing world.
Yeah, absolutely. But talking about how the locals are reacting, and the Panama Canal government and authorities are also speaking up against the resistance that they are showing about the American influence, which has been sudden after Trump administration taking over, and strongly undermining the very sovereignty and autonomy of Panama Canal. How is the American administration under Trump going to resolve this problem?
That's a very challenging problem to resolve because the United States has its policy priorities. They're not going to be shy about mentioning this. They're not going to be shy about telling Panama or other countries that we think you're subject to too much Chinese influence. On the other hand, the countries, their leaders are proud people. They don't want to be lectured by the United States. They don't want the United States to tell them what to do. So it's a very tough balance to make between those competing issues, and that's why good diplomacy is so important.
Okay, all right. Thank you for joining me, Ross, and giving me your views. On that note, we come to the end of this telecast of the World Report. Thanks for watching NewsX World.